Enough World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It is now the late afternoon of Friday, the 22nd of February, 2019, and the Capitol here on the banks of the Potomac was up early this morning and trying to detect action concerning the Mueller investigation. As people know, Friday seems to be Mueller's favorite day to bring indictments and get these malefactors, these Trumpers, hauled into court, bring them to justice, so to speak. But apparently not today. However, that is not the whole story, because a document is expected to be forthcoming from the Mueller-Weissman group, the special prosecutor's office, and that is the sentencing opinion or sentencing memorandum, which is submitted by the Mueller group to a federal judge here. And these are considerations for the judge to have in mind if you're going to sentence Manafort, which is what's going to happen later, in next week. But by midnight, we're expecting something interesting to come by about midnight, earlier, most likely, which is the summary, perhaps, a narrative of the nefarious activities of Manafort. And, of course, he's the one with these contacts to Kilimnik, right, meeting Kilimnik of Russian intelligence, meeting him in Europe, meeting him in Spain, and the incident we told you about a week or two ago, which was that infamous gathering in the Grand Havana Cigar Lounge of 666 Fifth Avenue, the Tishman Building, a property, of course, of the Kushner Group. Isn't it the way it all, it's a small world there in that corner of New York City. So that could contain something. And we're sort of in terra incognita, right? This is unknown territory because we're operating under the issue raised by CNN originally, and now I think parroted by many other news organizations, right? Many other directed conformist or schlemiel personalities that seem to go along with this idea that the Mueller investigation is about to end. I am very skeptical, and I'll cite you some of my reasons and also some authoritative experienced prosecutor types who all are dubious about this, although it's always possible, because remember, the Attorney General is now the infamous Barr, and this Barr, crossing the bar, B-A-R-R, this guy is, of course, the cover-up artist who kept George H.W. Bush, Weinberger, McFarlane, Elliot Abrams, and 3 CIA officials out of big legal trouble, big legal jeopardy back in 1992 and 1993. So this guy's specialty is to be a cover-up artist. And don't listen to all the bombastic hot air about what a man of character and how widely respected, and we've heard incorruptible. Whoa. Nobody's incorruptible, right? As one of the British prime ministers, I guess it's Walpole, who said, every man has his price in some term, maybe not money, but price. So the incorruptible, and as soon as you say incorruptible, who does this bring to mind? That's Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre, who was so incorruptible, he wouldn't take bribes, but the guillotine was kept busy, so I don't know what to make of that. But incorruptible, this is absolutely fatuous. This is like Jimmy Carter promising I'll never lie to you, or things of the sort. Anyway, we'll get to all this, but now we gotta recognize an extremely serious state of military emergency, and this is a real threat, and it puts the framework around your judgment, in particular of presidential candidates. Who among them can stand up to Putin? Who among them can go toe-to-toe with Putin and knock him out? That's now the big issue. We have two developments. They're basically one is the continuation of the other. On around midweek, we have Putin addressing a gathering of bigwigs, a gathering of the nomenklatura. The nomenklatura meaning a list, a hierarchical catalog or list of the top honchos it used to be the state and the party, right? And it used to be the principal pillars of power, the KGB, the army, the party, and the government, too, because that was the state planning apparatus, right? A lot of economic power there. So he's talking to these bigwigs of today, and this is a very brutal threat to the United States. And I'm so sorry. I know a lot of people, they just can't register this. They can't imagine that the peace angel Putin, who, it's true, did in 2013 help avoid the U.S. bombing of Syria. He did do that. But the wheels of history turn, and the same guy who writes, we know it, right? Russia can sign a friendship treaty and then be not so friendly. And that's what we're seeing right now. So you've got to change with that. It will not do to say, well, I decided in 1950 that I thought Russia was great, and I'm sticking with that. No, that is stick in the mud, and you will be sticking in the mud with that. So Putin is now saying, he's talking about the following situation. We have the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF. The way that came about was the Soviets were deploying very capable intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the SS-20. Those were being deployed in the western part of the Soviet Union, and they were pointed at Europe, and Europe began to get very worried. Helmut Schmidt, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing of France, went to Carter and others here in Washington and said, look, you've got to do something about this. You've got to counterbalance this because the power of these Russian missiles is considerable. It may even be overwhelming. And the Russians were building these things at a very, very rapid rate. 1979 NATO meeting said, okay, two-track decision. This is the famous Doppelbeschluss of 1979. So negotiate with Moscow to get rid of these intermediate-range nuclear weapons, and at the same time, get ready to deploy your own. And the 79 decision then turned in 1983 into the actual deployment, since the Russians wouldn't stop. They wouldn't quit. They refused. So it was the Pershing II missile, which had the ability to, say, if launched from Germany, hit Moscow in 4 to 5 minutes. And the cruise missiles were deployed at that time. And eventually that did reestablish parity or balance, and things calmed down because the Soviet Union was on its way to collapse. We'll be back in a minute with Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and we want you to be a part of our podcast 4 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's available around 9 o'clock at night, and that is your best summary, briefing, and strategic perspective. What to do tactical perspective, too, quite frequently. So be a part of that. Join the podcast. Go to www.americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and join that podcast. We do as much as we can here on the weekend, but in order to get the fine-grained granularity, that's where you've got to go over to americansystem.tv. You can get it through tarpley.net. Just click, and it will take you there. So join in that, right? This is a worthwhile voice. I hope you agree. If you're listening, you probably agree. So why don't you step up and join the podcast and magnify the influence of this channel, because you're going to see we are independent. We're not married to the Democratic Party, anything but. We've been increasingly alarmed by some of the things Pelosi is doing, alarmed by some of the irresponsible ranting coming from ultra-left mushheads in the Democratic Party, especially alarmed because those things could spell a second term for Trump. The Democratic Party, we'll try to argue later, is repeating some of the same mistakes the Democratic Party made after Watergate, during and after. So Putin, once again, the Pershing and cruise missiles, therefore, were put into Western Europe with consent, obviously, of the countries involved, could ask for it, in 1983. And at that point, this issue receded, and the center stage was the collapse of the Soviet Union for economic reasons. Now, bear that in mind. Has any of that really been remedied? The things that brought on the collapse of the USSR? Because that's what it was. It was an economic collapse. And has any of that been fixed? I guess we'll soon find out. I'm rather inclined to believe that it hasn't been fixed. Anyway, what Putin says right now is, well, Putin has created, first of all, a situation where the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed in Washington in, 87, 88, by Gorbachev and Reagan, the sleepwalker, water on the brain, that treaty has held for 30 years. But the Russians are violating the treaty. They have built a new intermediate range missile, and this violates the treaty. And they are incorrigible. They're obdurate. They won't get rid of it. So they say, we get to keep it, and we're going to threaten you if you try to redress that balance. I'm sorry, no. This is not Banana Republic, even though we have a head of state who looks like one. So what Putin is saying, this is now a bunch of threats. If U.S. missiles are deployed in Europe within a few minutes' flight of Moscow, Russia will aim more missiles at the Russians will target the missiles in Europe, but also command centers in the United States. This sounds like Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. This is the language of the Cold War. This is the way a Russian leader sounds when they're economically desperate at home, when they have failed economically. Anyway, we'll get to the background. Here's what Putin says. Russia will be forced to create and deploy new types of weapons that could be used not only against the territories where a direct threat to us comes from. One might almost say, whence comes a direct threat to us, but also against the territories where decision-making centers directing the use of missile systems threatening us are located. Boy, that's some prose. Anyway, it means Washington, D.C., New York, and elsewhere, right? It means the United States. So this is a direct threat. I don't know about you, but I don't like direct threats. And I'm not inclined to simply say, oh, well, you understand, right? It all goes back to the U.S. forces in Murmansk in 1919 or 1920. That would be the Noam Chomsky method. No, we don't follow that. We are historical, but not in this pedantic and ridiculous sense. The capability of such weapons, including the time to reach those centers, will be equivalent to the threats against Russia. Now, what he means is, if a modern, souped-up version of the Pershing II could go from Central Europe to Moscow in 5 minutes, then he wants to put his missiles off the coasts of the U.S., right? The old pattern, we've seen it again and again, that there would be Soviet ballistic missile submarines lurking off the U.S. coasts, and they had to be tailed, right? Because the idea was if the time came, you had to get rid of them right away. But he says we can now put these weapons on ships, and we can put them on other submarines in particular. Now, this seems to be going literally towards a repeat of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you'll see that seems to be exactly what we've got. He's got that on his mind. So here's what Putin says. Among the ruling class in the United States, there are many leaders who are too captivated by ideas of their exceptionalism and their superiority over the entire rest of the world. Exceptionalism, huh? Well, the biggest exceptionalism in the world is the theory of Moscow, the Third Rome. Moscow, the Third Rome, which he believes in. And his guru there, that patriarch, he would have been a patriarch, but now he's just a guru. The theory that Rome on the Tiber fell, Rome, the new Rome, Constantinople, fell. 2 Romes have fallen. There won't be another, but the third one stands, and that is Moscow. So Moscow, according to this, is the center of an apocalyptic worldwide Roman Empire. And that's what the group around Putin seems to believe, at least, some of these oligarchs are interested in money, but this generally, it seems to be a fairly widespread ideology, let's say, among Kremlin bigwigs. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're talking here in Washington, D.C., edition of the 22nd of February, Friday. So, exceptionalism. The Moscow theory of the Third Rome, Moscow, the Third Rome, is the most extreme exceptionalist theory that we've seen. It's the master race, I guess. It's the chosen people. It is exceptionalism because it's divinely ordained, but it's going to control the world. Moskovskaya teoria Tretьего Riма. And this, of course, comes from the apocalyptic mystical monk, Philothay or Philotheos of Pskov. During the 1500s, it's got to do with the time of basically Ivan the Terrible, right? Ivan, the Grand Duke of Moscow, who then I guess became the Tsar of Russia. So this is some level of hypocrisy. So anyway, he says, among the ruling class in the United States, there are many people who are too captivated by ideas of their own exceptionalism and their superiority over the rest of the world. Well, this is the pot calling the kettle black. I'm sorry. But do they know how to count? Surely they do. Let them first calculate the range and speed of our advanced weapons systems. He's got hypersonic weapons, he says, that can, and this is maybe not completely true yet, that can travel at 6 times the speed of sound, right? Mach 6, speed of sound, 720 miles an hour approximately. 1,200 Ks per hour? And then let them contemplate the speed of our advanced weapon systems and then make decisions on whether to threaten our country. Well, you broke the treaty. He does not mention Trump by name, but he says there is a secretive deep state that has caused all these troubles for the American president, who's such a wonderful guy. Now remember, this is now the first anniversary from the time Putin put out these films showing missiles hitting the United States, right? There's this torpedo that can go around the world all by itself. A bunch of other things. We've gone through them all. And notice there was one of them that seemed to be going down to Florida. And what did Trump do? Nary a peep. This is an example of strategic cowardice, dereliction of duty, cowardice in the face of the enemy. This is just amazing what we're stuck with, right? We do not have a president. We have he's somebody who manifests himself as a void in terms of anything positive. He has not answered these threats from Putin. The word from Trump is, threaten us all you want. We don't care. I'm Trump. I'm a coward. So go ahead and bluster all you like. There will be no response. So remember, so that was a year ago, so they've been working on those ever since. Now, fortunately, the U.S. is also working. By the way, the answer to all of this, orbital lasers, high-powered lasers in orbit, on airplanes, on the ground, sure, point defense. Use the anti-missile missiles you've got right now. That's fine. Mid-course, THAAD, everything you've got, Aegis. Those are all fine, but they're very limited. So with that, you can deal with 10 or 20, but you can't deal with a couple of hundred, which is what dear comrade Putin is talking about. So that's the absolute void of leadership that we have here. So Putin is threatening all of this stuff, and this is a bad situation, and it's even worse because many forces here in the U.S. don't seem to want to know about it. So Putin goes through this thing about exceptional, and he says, do they know how to count? Surely they do. Let them first calculate the range and speed of our advanced weapons systems, and then make decisions on the threats to our country. He says that the Russians will launch their first nuclear submarine carrying a Poseidon. A Poseidon is an unmanned underwater nuclear drone. This is the super long-range torpedo, in effect. They have the Zircon hypersonic missile for the Russian Navy. The missile can fly, at 9 times the speed of sound with a range of 620 miles. So the other problem, though, is he has to recognize that he is an economic failure. And this is, I think there's a pretty direct, pretty obvious, crude causality between his economic failure and the need now to compensate with adventurism, threats, bluster, the usual Soviet behavior, right? The usual Khrushchev style, Berlin crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis, 100-megaton bomb. We've seen this all before, right? This civilization that he represents doesn't seem to have a hell of a lot of creativity or ability to come up with new things on its own. So here he is. Is he going to repeat the Cuban Missile Crisis? With Khrushchev, it was economic failure. Khrushchev's problems were he couldn't get consumer goods going, and he had this Virgin Lands program, right, sending people out into the taiga, and the taiga, I guess, in particular, but the steppes, the tundra, and trying to do economic development, and it didn't work because he didn't have the right planning. All sorts of reasons for that. So that's when Khrushchev began with the rocket rattling. Yes, rocket rattling, threats. They would threaten each individual European country. They'd say to the Italians, it's going to be like Vesuvius all over your country. And they'd make up things like this for each of the NATO allies in Europe. So this is the predicament. Now, Putin's economic failure. The pension system, the Russian pension system is very meager. It is meager. But even so, you got to imagine the court of Putin in the Kremlin with all these oligarchs, right? You're going to have these people, oh, aren't they charming? Deripaska, Firtash, Vekselberg, all of them, right? Those are your oligarchs. Right? The nomenclatura, the elite of the current regime are these oligarchs. They are boyars, right? The old Russian word for these noblemen. But this is it used to be called a service nobility. Well, service, it's not exactly that, but it's a money service nobility, because you can't get that rich. You can't be a Deripaska or a Friedman or these people. You can only do that if you are under the wing, if you accept the dominance of Putin, right? There were some who couldn't do that, right? Khodorkovsky tried to have a coup of his own. We had others, any number. Berezovsky disappeared, died under strange circumstances. So some oligarchs tried to say, I'm an oligarch and I'm as good as you are. No, those are basically all gone. So the economic failures, right? And it's all the more bitter because you've got these super rich, multi-billionaire predators that are at the top, the apex of state construction at the Kremlin. But standards are falling. We'll be back to World Crisis Radio. So you got to flesh out now just a little bit more of this question of Putin, in effect, threatening the United States with nuclear war, and our demented president, the tenant of the White House, the usurper of the Oval, you know who we mean. That character, nary a peep. He skulks. He cowers in fear, I guess, because he dare not upset his arrangements. I guess blackmail material might be the answer. I don't know. But here's the thing. You've got this regime of fabulously wealthy oligarchs, right? The court of the Romanovs, whatever you want to call it, with princes and all the rest, and princelings. But what is the lot of the average Russian, right? The modern equivalent of the muzhik or peasant? Well, the Russian people are being treated to this. The Russian pension system is very meager. And at a certain point in the last year or two, the Putin group has said, well, we need pension reform. Watch out for reform when it means stripping you of your rights or a part of them. So the pension reform that Putin proposed, he said, I'm going to increase the number of years, or the retirement age. Look at it that way. I'm going to increase the retirement age to get a pension by 5 years. 5 years! Whoa! When even a scoundrel like Daniel Patrick Moynihan in the 1980s was taking part with Ronald Reagan in the scheme to loot Social Security to pay for tax cuts for the rich. That's what they do. That's what they want to do today. The Republicans. The increase in the retirement age under this Moynihan ripoff was gradual, and it came in, step by step over a period of 20 years. And it was not, I don't know if it ever added up to 5 years. It added up to something significant, but maybe not quite 5. We'll look it up. In this case, though, Putin says, if you're a man, congratulations, you get to work 5 more years for the greater glory of my oligarchs. My oligarchs will be thinking of you when they, they're on the Italian Riviera or in Paris or in swinging London. Well, that led to quite a backlash. But for women, it's even worse. Women, even worse, right? Notice we have to mention, that fascism, one of the features of fascism culturally is misogyny, right? Fascists don't like women. Fascists hate, fear, mistreat, certainly, women. So Putin says, all right, now for the women, we're going to have an 8-year increase in the pension age. So for men, 5 years, bad enough. Then Putin says, yes. And for women, they'll have to work another 8 years. So not 5, but 8. 3 more years than the men. My God, this is awful. So that led to quite a backlash. And that is the heart and the guts of what's happening to Putin right now. We are the united front against austerity here. We don't like austerity. We know that the Green New Deal is an austerity program. We know that Brexit is an austerity program. And we know that the Putin regime is now an austerity regime. So the 5-year extra working time for the men, now 5 years, wonderful. He showed mercy. 5 years for women, right? So this is now grinding his bombastic, hyper, chauvinist, jingoistic array. Now, and this is one of the big things that accounts for the difference we can see between the relatively, relatively passive, in terms of the relatively non-threatening Putin of earlier years, say around 2014 to 2015. There is this shift, and that goes together with this idea of attacking the U.S. through cyber attacks, possibly because of the tremendous impact that we're now seeing. The U.S. sanctions, right? If it hadn't been for Trump, Deripaska and Rusal would be gone. The power of the United States is immense, and the bungling leaders that we have don't seem to get the idea that they could do a lot, or Trump himself. ZTE, Huawei, right? What are you going to do with them? You could do a lot. ZTE was basically gone until Xi called up Don and convinced him to appease on that subject too. But now, the other thing that is important to mention in this context is that the poverty rate in Russia is high. It's 145 million people. It's falling. 19 million Russians still live in poverty, and the birth rate fell by 11% in the most recent year. The most recent year for which the full statistics are available seems to be 2017. So take a look. There's an interesting article here. Get the New York Times article on this by Neil McFarquhar of the New York Times from earlier this week, and you'll see. But an 11% drop. Now, Putin has been talking about increasing the standard of living, about increasing the birth rate, encouraging family formation, encouraging natalism, right, to try to promote more children. And that's a perfectly good thing to do. But that does not mix with an austerity program which is designed to gratify these parasitical, predatory oligarchs whose interests are overwhelmingly the ones represented by the Russian state. So he's got to make these threats. Now, you could say to Putin, right, what is it that you are complaining about? Well, in this case, it's these Euro missiles, as they were called, right? That the U.S. might come up with a Euro missiles plan that certain countries would probably accept, right? Probably someplace like Poland or the Baltic states or Hungary, Czech Republic, Romania. It depends, right? Slovakia, all different. I don't know the individual situations, but those would be the typical places. So Putin is now saying guns and butter. Now let's just hurry on. In talking to journalists later in the day, later in the day, on Wednesday, Putin comes out and says to the Western world, talking again, once again, with Russian journalists, I guess, or journalists, anyway. He says, he says, but the main thing is he brings this up. The Cuban Missile Crisis, right? We saw it. It seems to be implicit in what he said in his formal speech. But now, later, in this informal setting with the journalists, he says, Cuban Missile Crisis. You know what that was? Khrushchev, in October 1962, put Soviet missiles into Cuba because he thought he could easily make up his missile gap vis-a-vis the United States with this cheap trick. And this brought the world to the brink of destruction. And this time, Putin says the tensions that exist in the world, these tensions are not a reason to ratchet up confrontation to the levels of the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 1960s. In any case, that's not what we want. Of course not. He wants to walk all over you with no response, right? That's clear. If somebody wants that, well, okay, they're welcome to try. I have set out today what it means. In other words, I've told you the missiles that we'll have. And let them count the missiles and count the flight time. Back in a Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is our edition for Friday, the 22nd of February. You'll hear this starting on Saturday, the 23rd, I think, in the late afternoon. So just to wrap it up, right, what Putin said then in the post-speech, in the spin room, I guess, if that's what they have, he says the warning will be that Russia will deploy hypersonic missiles on ships and submarines which could lurk outside U.S. territorial waters if Washington moves new intermediate-range nuclear weapons into Europe. And the quote is, "We're talking about naval delivery vehicles, submarines or surface ships. We can put them in neutral waters because of their speed and range. Plus, they are not stationary. They move, and the U.S., will have to find them. You work it out. Mach 9, 9 times about 700, so 6,300 plus miles per hour, and 1,000 kilometers of range." Now, of course, here's where you need point defense. You've got to have lasers, ground-based lasers, ready to zap them. This is where you can have airborne lasers, right, on air-breathing airplanes. And, of course, if you have some look-down, shoot-down lasers in orbit, right, keep it right over the two coasts, you can also deal with them that way. So there are ways out of that. And naturally, a real president, if we can imagine, if we can remember what a real president was, would come out on television and say, look, we've got these threats. We're not going to over-dramatize because a lot of this is bluster for internal consumption, given the economic failures of Putinism and the oligarchs running wild and trampling over everybody. But we're going to have to be able to neutralize this. Putin is essentially boasting that my strike time is quicker than yours. Right? I can strike you before you can strike me. And these are decapitation strikes you might be talking about, right? To blow up, except under these circumstances, the Russians are hardly likely to try a decapitation strike on Washington, D.C., not with the current void that exists in the White House. So you get all this. A couple of other interesting sidelines. It was when the U.S. deployed the Pershing II and Cruise in 1983, that's when Marshal Nikolai Agarkov, at that point the leading hawk in the Russian Soviet defense establishment, that's where he did things like shoot down the Korean Airlines plane in the Far East, right? He did a bunch of provocations. Naturally, there was a so-called peace movement in Europe. These were, many of them well-meaning, but a lot of them were mushheads and this bland pacifism that couldn't realize that there really was a reason for self-defense, and that the self-defense was probably a better chance for peace than a kind of, what can we say, prone or supine acceptance of the Russian diktat. Now, here's the other one. Think back to those interviews that Putin did with Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone now, not the other Stone. We'll get him later. But Oliver Stone, in those interviews, he was talking to Putin about this. And Putin, concerning this issue of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Putin said something like, you know that I am a critic of Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. But in this case, Khrushchev, in the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, putting these offensive missiles into Cuba, that is justifiable. So Putin has got this, what can we say, a chink in his armor when it comes to this kind of stuff. So this could go anywhere. You also have this feeling, right? We're told now that there's going to be a Trump-Xi summit by the end of March. Of course, we have the Kim summit next week, 27th and 28th of February. Is it now the case that these people have an intelligence picture, given their tentacles all over the world, that Trump is reaching the end of his mandate, so to speak, this year, we think? The Mueller report, many other things, the House hearings, and that therefore they want to formalize and consummate as much appeasement and make that irreversible and indelible, the kind of stuff that McCabe was talking about. In other words, lock in appeasement before impeachment or indictment or whatever else might happen, right? There's also the playing the 25 card. So Putin thinks that Khrushchev was theoretically right in 1962. And, of course, Oliver Stone blithely and in a blasé manner went on to other things. All right, so that's this. Now, let's try to catch up on some of the important stuff. We had been worried during the week. We noticed that Pelosi was dragging her feet on the question of rolling back the odious and infamous declaration of a state of emergency. We've been through all this stuff. States of emergency are historically the antechamber or prelude to dictatorship. We don't want that. That is unconstitutional. Of course, we have to bitterly thank the libertarians for supporting Trump after they had been prating for years about the Constitution and how sacrosanct it was and how Obama trampled it. No. Look what we have now. This guy says, I can spend money without Congress. Well, that's really unconstitutional. Of course, that's impeachable. But he's now built up a head of steam. We have 16 states, from Becerra of California to Frosch of Maryland, Illinois, New York, many other states, Massachusetts, I think, are in the mix. So they're trying to roll back the state of emergency with those means. And the temptation was clearly for Pelosi that she would sit back and do nothing, which I think is her default position. Her default position is certainly not the attack. The Washington Post on Wednesday seems to have detected a tendency towards quietism, in other words, do-nothingism, on the part of Pelosi. The editorial is, "Don't stand idly by, Congress. Legislators should not wait for the courts to decide whether Mr. Trump's border wall emergency is out of order." In other words, don't wait for the progress of the 16 states, the ACLU, landowners, many, many others, right? All kinds of people are going to be suing and are suing. But it looks like the Washington Post thinks that somebody thinks they should wait. And waiting was what we saw going on. We saw that the 16 states put in their suit within a couple of days, and then the week began to drag on, and Pelosi did nothing. And we put that in one of our headlines, right? Pelosi, get busy, get moving. And finally now she says, okay, you should all vote for the Joaquin Castro resolution, which is a narrowly crafted, in other words, a resolution ending the state of emergency in a way that can pass the House. That's easy, if Pelosi says so. But then in the Senate, that can actually attract enough Republican votes in the Senate. Right? Narrowly drawn, not a lot of bombastic stuff against Trump or so forth. So this is now going to be, I think, it might be voted on this afternoon here on Friday. So we'll be back. So your host, Dr. Dudley, here on the banks of the Potomac. We had snow this week. A lot of it has melted away through rain and other events. Now, Pelosi and her action to terminate the state of emergency. This is so fundamental. She should have had this ready to go a week ago. As soon as he brought it out, plunk this down. So Pelosi held a conference call this afternoon with reporters, and she says she's going to bring this resolution, the Joaquin Castro resolution, the Hispanic caucus, in effect, bring this to a floor vote on Tuesday. So it's a resolution of disapproval that if it could stand, go to the Senate and get by Trump, it would then terminate the state of emergency. With prejudice, I might add. Disapproval resolution was introduced today. So the Castro resolution was introduced today, right now, and it will get a vote then on Tuesday. I think there are these waiting periods that are sort of built in. And the details on this, there are 225 co-sponsors of the bill, including one Republican. This is Justin Amash of Michigan. So that is a guaranteed pass in the House. Well, sure. And you'd think that would be more. I'm sure it'll get more votes than that. So Castro says that they're trying to get more Republicans to vote for it. Pelosi makes a special plea. She sent letters to Republicans saying, please vote for this. I know you care about the Constitution of the United States. I know you care about the separation of powers and the co-equal nature of the branches of government. What's really important is how these Republicans will vote on Tuesday. Now, of course, a lot of them are these zombified hand raisers for Trump. And this then goes on to the Senate. In terms of the Senate, we have Lindsey Graham on the Senate side, right, who has been, mentally rather, what can we say, rather labile lately. Graham says that when that resolution of disapproval gets to the Senate, that it will get a handful of Republican supporters. Take a look here. A handful. I don't think he mentions anybody. No, that's not what they do. A handful of Republicans will back a resolution to end the state of emergency. A handful, says Graham, but there will be enough left to sustain a veto. Now that means a very embarrassing defeat for Trump next week, precisely at the time that he thinks he's posturing with Madman Kim, his lover, right? They fell in love, as Trump put it in his inimitable way. Graham says the Democrats are hypocrites, and they're only doing this because they hate Trump. I hope Republicans will not reward this, quite frankly. So, House votes on Tuesday, then it goes relatively quickly to the Senate side. Then they would need 4 Republicans. I think they have Collins already, and then there are some others. So I think it's absolutely possible for this resolution of disapproval to pass the Senate on a majority vote with no filibuster, okay? That's all built into this National Emergencies Act of 1975 or 76. So that's the situation there. And now we also have some other news just coming in that according to some sources, let's see, this is quite recent that we're trying to catch up with, that the Mueller report will not come next week, right? As the James Bond movie, the Mueller report is not imminent. I repeat, not imminent. So it won't be today and it won't be next week, says a Justice Department official talking to The Hill. Now, The Hill are reactionaries, and remember also next week, next week is going to be Michael Cohen week here in Washington. He's the man of the hour. He's going to testify to House Intelligence in secret early in the week. Then Wednesday, pencil this in, get your popcorn and whatever else, because that's going to be the Cohen testimony to the House Judiciary Committee. I'm sorry, Government Operations. So that will be Cohen, and then he's going to go on to the Senate in some form. I don't think we have the details on that. Now, today, as we said, we're going to have the Manafort sentencing opinion. We should probably tackle this thing with Roger Stone. Now, Roger Stone, and this is a remarkable occurrence. Roger Stone had posted on his blog a picture of the judge in his case, and it looks like, as if you've seen it, right? You should of course take a quick look. That it looks like it is a circle with a cross in the circle, extending out beyond the bounds of the circle. So it looks like a crosshairs, and that may well be true, but I think we have to supplement that. And I'm amazed that the discussion of this, including the judge in this case, Amy Berman Bryant, I think, she was asking Stone, what is this that you've put here? And he says it is a Celtic or Celtic symbol. More than just crosshairs. It's ideological. Very interesting. So we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in an overcast Washington, D.C. Now, this picture of the judge in his case, which Stone says was posted by one of his volunteers. Anyway, we can't comment on any of this. But what we can do is say a few words about the origins of that symbol. If you were in certain pro-fascist neighborhoods of Rome in particular, that's a symbol you'd see on a lot of the walls because it is a clearly fascist symbol. It is the Celtic or Celtic cross, but I'm drawing here on the Italian Wikipedia Simboli Fascisti, and of course the U.S. Corresponding one, fascist symbolism. So what is it? Well, according to this article here on fascist symbolism, the Celtic or Celtic cross is used by neo-Nazi white nationalist groups worldwide, including the Italian New Force, Forza Nuova, I guess that is, Stormfront, David Duke's website, and the VSBD /PDA. This is, of course, this is something that was banned in the early 80s, but die Volkssozialistische Bewegung Deutschlands Partei der Arbeit. People's Socialist Movement of Germany, means National Socialist Labor Party, was a German neo-Nazi organization led by Friedhelm Busse. All right, so this is a banned party. That's already a lot. But when we go back to the Simboli Fascisti Wikipedia here we find the Celtic cross is one of the most widespread neo-fascist symbols, and it was used earlier, before World War II, by the French Popular Party, French People's Party, Le Parti Populaire Français. That is a fascist party created in France in around 1936. It's a backlash against the French Popular Front of Léon Blum and his socialists and trade unionists and so forth. And it is, as this also says, in the post-World War II period, used by many groups, neo-fascist groups and extreme right-wing groups in all of Europe. So this Parti Populaire Français, a couple of words about them. These are the so-called ultra-collaborators. In France, under the Nazi occupation, you could be a collaborator, or you could go beyond that and be an ultra-collaborator. Now, here's the idea. There was the northern part of France was occupied by German troops, the southern part not, at least for a while, then it was. And there was the Vichy regime of Marshal Pétain, which was fascist, but there was a group in Paris around this Jacques Doriot, D-O-R-I-O-T, Jacques Doriot, and these were the ultra-collaborators, les ultra-collabos. And they said, no, Vichy is not good enough. We want a French government that would be actively, totally devoted, allied to the Nazi cause. So that is some idea of what this symbol means. So these are important considerations to bear in mind, and I'm amazed that the media and indeed the proceedings in the court seem to be unaware of the heavy associations borne by this symbol. Now, what's going to happen with Mueller? This is, of course, the big question which obsesses the nation's capital. We were told by CNN earlier this week that the Mueller report is imminent. It's about to be delivered, and that's going to be the end of it for Mueller. Now, we have assumed an attitude of skepticism This could be. It could be principally because for the last 10 days or so, the Attorney General is somebody called Barr. Barr. Let's just look up Barr, right? He can do a lot of terrible stuff. Back in 1992, we have, George H.W. Bush, the darling of the media, all of a sudden, the liberal Republican with Wall Street roots, and of course, Brown Brothers Harriman. So this character, Barr, was named as the second Attorney General for George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, Mad Dog Sr., as we call him here. And Barr is still today proud of the fact that he told Bush how to cover up Iran-Contra, how to make a cover-up that would actually stand the test of time and frustrate the efforts of the brilliant and eminent special prosecutor Lawrence Walsh, another eminent Flushing High School graduate. Lawrence Walsh had been tracking down a lot of this stuff. He had indicted Weinberger for his role in this, and when the witness list came back from Weinberger's lawyers, it included George H.W. Bush, right? And this was as the term was ending. We're in the second half of 1992. And after Bush lost the bid for re-election, he then began thinking, essentially, how can I make myself bulletproof? So here's what Barr says, quote, I went over and told President Bush that I thought he should not only pardon Caspar Weinberger, but while he was at it, he should pardon about 5 others. Barr tells historians at the University of Virginia Miller Center in 2001. Okay? And that meant Weinberger was pardoned, and the 5 others were Elliott Abrams. We see him today, right? He was causing trouble in the Bush the Younger administration, and now he is one of the leading warmongers against Venezuela. This is a guy who shouldn't be around, but is in the administration. And then CIA bigwigs, Duane Claridge, sometimes known as Dewey Claridge, I think, but anyway, Duane Claridge, Alan Fears, and Claire George, and the former National Security Council director under Reagan, Robert McFarlane. This is Bud McFarlane. They had intentionally subverted laws specifically designed to stop Reagan's no-holds-barred approach, well, arming. This is, I'm reading from Think Progress. This is too weak. It was gun running and drug running run out of the White House, rapprochement with Iran, or better yet, balancing the Iran-Iraq war. Abrams cut a deal with Walsh, the special prosecutor who handled the pardons that Barr had helped to engineer, but this cut Walsh's work off at the knees, so Abrams was allowed to plead guilty to lying to Congress of more serious charges. So this is Barr. So could Barr fire Mueller? Well, of course. It's so obvious. This kind of a morality. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Come to the end of our Saturday program once again. So many crimes, so little time. Now, let's look ahead, because this coming week, the 27th, 28th, this is going to be the Kim-Trump Summit, or Conference, the new Munich, this time in Hanoi, Vietnam. How interesting. Hanoi Don will be added to his list of epithets, right? He goes around talking about the senator from Connecticut, right, as Da Nang Dick Richard Blumenthal. Well, it's going to be Hanoi Don. and because they also used to do the one on the actress Jane Fonda, right? Hanoi Jane. All right. So what is likely to happen here? Now, the obvious thing is go back to that presentation by the various intelligence agency leaders a couple of weeks ago now, and take a look at what they say, because what they say is highly germane. They say the opinion of the U.S. intelligence community is that the North Koreans have no intention of actually divesting, getting rid of their nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and that's simply a fact, that they won't do it because they regard it as the ultimate insurance against regime change. It is the passport to regime survival, which for this bunch of communist oligarchs means the family survival, right? This communist dynasty. This is North Korea is the place where a communist dynasty has actually existed since about 1950 or a little bit earlier. So Trump is going on this trip. Now, Trump is in a purely demagogic mode. Surprise, surprise. Purely demagogic. He wants to have a summit with Kim at the end of the week, and then at the end of March, another summit, this time with Xi. And if you look at the U.S. Stock market, it is being kept up from day to day and week to week by rumors that are being spread, right? Leaks from the Trump White House that things are going okay with China, that there's going to be a deal, so don't worry, it won't be that bad, and on and on. So that's the general framework. Now, the specific thing we have to worry about is Trump seems to have been doing everything he can in the way of demolition of the U.S. and Western strategic position. Many have concluded that this is because he is either blackmailed or controlled by forces outside of this country, think Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and so forth, right, or some combination of those. What he might do, he might announce the pullout of all U.S. forces from South Korea. That is likely to lead to war, I think, in the short term. He is likely to sell out Japan. He is likely to sell out South Korea. One sort of intermediate thing that he might do is to say we're going to permanently call off the military drills, the joint drills of the U.S. and South Korea. The series that used to be called Ulchi Focus Lens between the ROK and the USA. He has ended those temporarily. Is he going to make that a permanent ban? He wants the Nobel Peace Prize as a feature of his 2020 campaign, right, beginning now, as soon as he can get it. Right? Well, by the end of this year, I guess the Nobel Peace Prize is decided towards the end of the year and probably awarded in December, as I recall. Trump wants this. He has, according to reports, called up Prime Minister Abe of Japan and asked Abe to nominate him, Trump, in the vis-a-vis the Swedish Nobel Committee. So he wants this. I have a hard time imagining this, although every oligarch has his price, I guess. Trump is not a generous rewarder of anything. He tends to forget services done to himself. So he wants that. Now, one of the other more dangerous things, in addition to these nightmare scenarios, right, that he announces the pulling out of the U.S. forces out of South Korea. He could announce that he's going to dump Taiwan, that the Republic of China on Taiwan is no longer an interest of the United States and they should go to hell, in effect. And what else might he do? Well, what we've seen in some of his remarks are these ideas that it's not necessary for Kim to give up his nuclear weapons. This is the innuendo, the overtone of Trump, some of these recent remarks by Trump. You don't have to get rid of all of your nuclear weapons. All I ask you to do is stop testing them, stop flaunting them. Don't show them in the parades there in Pyongyang at the great communist festivals. And I can live with that. So in other words, appeasement, and it's a kind of contempt for the intelligence of the American people, for the intelligence of world opinion, that people would be fooled by that, where he says, yeah, you keep your nukes, but just keep them out of sight, right? Put them in the drawer there, right? You can keep them. And again, it's all demagogy, and it's all focused on the selfish political interest of this creature that we have to contend with. So that is bad. And once again, I would call on Eliot Engel, is now the chairman of the House International Affairs Foreign Relations Committee. I would like to see a statement from Eliot Engel where he says, Trump, you should not go on this summit trip. You are incompetent, or words to that effect. You have a track record of appeasement. We still don't know what commitments were made to Putin in that initial 2-hour tete-a-tete of Putin with Trump in Helsinki. We know that our president is a psychological wreck and a moron, and Putin is eager, needless to say, eager for strategic and other gain. Trump has attempted in every way possible to limit or lift, abolish the U.S. economic sanctions against Russia without getting anything in return, by the way. There's no negotiation. This is a complete giveaway, a sellout, appeasement. And Putin has been attempting to press this case. He wants to get those sanctions lifted, and I'm afraid that this would amount now, whatever the context. If you want to think about sanctions in a general abstract framework, sure, you can have a big argument with that. But right now, what have you got? We're being told that the Russian meddling campaign for the 2020 elections, that this has already started, and that the Russians are attacking through their bots and subterfuges. They're attacking Elizabeth Warren. They're attacking here Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Beto O'Rourke. Those are the candidates that are not acceptable to Moscow. They're already under attack. So Russia has done everything to install a fascist regime here in the United States. They have not stopped. This cannot be rewarded. So Trump is not tough on Russia. He is an appeaser. Just his appeasement is limited by what the Congress will let him get away with. That's the only thing we can say. So this has been World Crisis Radio, and we will be seeing you again next week. Please join us on Monday night for The American System at 9 o'clock at americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv.